This is my name's Kyle. I'm an alcoholic. It's awesome to be at this meeting. Um, from all of the times I was able to be at this meeting from like 2017, 2018 until now. So I have a great affinity for these late night meetings. They help to save my life. And it's good to see an interpreter in a meeting too. I used to get high with deaf people a lot, like a lot. So it was a good time. Anyway, um, our speaker tonight is Joe, and Joe came to us from the great state of Georgia, specifically from Savannah, Georgia. And he has been involved in YPA specifically in Georgia, and he came to our committee, and he has brought a lot of experience, grace. But the most important thing that he's brought is his amazing beard. His beard is just really amazing. And I really don't know his sobriety at all, but that beard tells me he's going to have a fire share. So everybody listen to Joe.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm glad you appreciate the beard so much. Everybody, my name is Joe. I'm an alcoholic. I'm really grateful to be able to be here tonight and to be asked to be of service. That's always something that still to this day baffles me. People ask me to go places and ask me to be part of things instead of go away and leave us alone. So that's obviously something completely different in my life. My sobriety date is April 19th of 2004. When I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I did not think that I was an alcoholic. I did not want to be an alcoholic. I wanted anything else to be wrong with me other than that. What I was a scared, pissed off 23-year-old kid who was suicidal and didn't know what else to do with my life. This was the last stop, as it were. It was this had to work, or I was going to take my own life. Um, I was going to talk about step three tonight, but I do want to start off talking about step one because it's very important for me. When I first came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous at 23, like I said, I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be an alcoholic, but it was suggested to me by a coworker I had at the time that brought me to my first meeting. And I don't remember exactly what was being talked about at my first meeting, but I do remember two things from that meeting. Is that the first thing is they went around the room and they introduced themselves and said, "My name is such and such. I'm an alcoholic." And when it got around to me, because I didn't want to stick out like a sore thumb, I said, "My name is Joe and I'm an alcoholic." And I remember as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I was like, okay, like, all right, maybe. And then the next thing I remember from that meeting is everybody started talking about things that I thought that I was bitterly alone with, that nobody could possibly understand, that it was my own personal hell. And that I heard people talking about, sharing about, and laughing about the pain that I was currently living in. And I'll be perfectly honest, I kept coming back to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I picked up a white chip that night, and I kept coming back to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous because that was the only hour every day where I felt like I didn't have a thousand voices screaming in my head, that I wasn't like stuck in this spiral of self-destruction and self-hatred. And that's the reason why I kept coming back at first. I got a home group, I got a sponsor, I started working the steps. I like to think it was to the best of my ability, but I had a lot of reservations about this thing. I had a lot of doubts. I was 23 years old. I didn't fit the bill of what I thought an alcoholic was, even though I was hearing you guys explain me every meeting I went to. Um, and so I kind of I hung around. I did the fellowship thing. I went through the steps. I played it all lip service. And I was in the army at the time. I was a medic in the army. And after about a year, I think it was coming up on my first year of sobriety, and the army moved me. And when I changed stations, I did everything that I was supposed to do. I reached out to an intergroup office there. I found meetings. I found a place where I could like live off base because I was a high enough rank at the time. And I moved. And when I got out there, AA was there, but the people that I had met in there weren't there. The people that I had formed relationships with, their friendships with, their fellowships with weren't there. Um, And I have this built-in forgetter, where I feel like I'm the only one that feels this pain. I'm the only one that understands this or that. And I started, kind of separating myself from, being the wallflower, not wanting to reach my hand out and say, "Hey, I'm Joe, I'm an alcoholic. Nice to meet you." And before I knew it, I started not going to meetings, and I started making friends again outside of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I really only know how to make one type of friend outside of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had this crazy idea in my head. I was about a year and a half sober by the time I stopped working AA. And I remember I had this great idea that I was 24 and a half years old now. I hadn't had a drink in a year and a half. I should be able to figure out how to live a normal life and just not drink and just not drug, right? And it was a great plan. I got in an incredibly toxic relationship. And of course, the best thing to do in an incredibly toxic relationship is to get married. So we decided to get married. We had the two cars in the driveway. We adopted a cat. We adopted a dog. I had the house. Everything on the outside was supposed to be absolutely perfect. Everything that I thought that I needed to do as a young man, I was doing, but I felt shattered on the inside. All of that insidiousness came back. All of that, the bewilderments that our big book talks about, all of that stuff came back, and I couldn't understand why I was back to this place of being suicidal, of wanting to just rip my life apart and tear everything down around me without having had taken a drink or a drug, you know. Um, the very quick abridged part of the story is that, within a year, I burned my life to the ground. I ended up facing a court martial in the Army. I was facing a divorce. I had done some things that I was going to be kicked out of the Army and sent to jail for. And I did all of this stuff stark raving sober. I hadn't been to a meeting in about a year and a half. And I got to the point of being so suicidal that I found myself at the place that the big book talks about, where I couldn't conceive of a life with drinking, and I couldn't conceive of a life without drinking. And I almost took my life. That's the point where my higher power interceded and did something for me, which I couldn't do for myself. I firmly believe that today. And that, meanwhile, that was a higher power that I didn't want to have anything to do with, because that was my real fear about this. You guys kept talking about your higher power or God or whatever you wanted to call it. And I was so thoroughly convinced that I was the biggest piece of human filth that ever walked the face of the earth, that I was completely irredeemable, that there's no higher power that could ever possibly love me. It was good for y'all, it worked for y'all, but it would never work for me. Funnily enough, in true alcoholic fashion, even though I was fairly certain I was the biggest piece of human filth that ever walked the face of the earth, I was also kind of certain that I was better than you. So, get away from me, don't talk to me. I think only alcoholics can understand that crazy duality. Anyway, and I ended up finding myself in a psych ward for like 37 days. I drove myself to the hospital miraculously instead of killing myself, and they put me in the psych ward for 37 days. And when I got out, I started going back to meetings, and I had like maybe a month and a half before my court martial, and I started doing the same thing, man. I started, hanging around the fringes, not putting my hand out, not introducing myself, just trying to get this deal through osmosis. And my court martial date came. I got a bad conduct discharge from the Army. I got sentenced to 3 months in prison and to a military prison. And then, like I got sent there. And when I got out, I had to move back home. And by this point, I was 27 years old. Coming up on my 27th birthday, I had to move back in with my parents because I completely burned my life to the ground. And I really couldn't understand. I was so bitterly resentful and angry, and just I didn't understand how I managed to do this to my life without drinking and without drugging. And what I didn't realize at the time, what I thankfully was given the opportunity to learn, is because I'm an alcoholic. Whether I'm drinking and drugging or not, I'm an alcoholic. This thing resides in me. It's a spiritual malady. It's a maladaptation to life, whatever you want to call it. And I don't have to have a drink or a drug in my body today to absolutely destroy my life if I'm not actively working this program. I reluctantly went to a meeting, and it was funny. I was sitting in this meeting and I heard this. There was this girl that was in there that said something, and somebody shared. I don't remember what she was talking about or what was shared, but she interrupted the person and she said, "You guys are hurting my feelings." And then there was this old, crusty guy sitting along the wall smoking a cigarette. And because this was in Savannah, there was like an outside place where you could still smoke in the meetings. It was pretty awesome. And he leaned forward and he hollered across the meeting room. He said, "This is not about your mother effing feelings. This is about your mother effing life." And I was actually the one person I had introduced myself to was sitting next to me. And I leaned over and I said, "I think I'm going to ask that guy to be my sponsor." Because that's exactly what I needed to hear that night. That is the exact message that I needed to hear, and a message that I need to be continually reminded of quite often. I can get all up in my head and all up in my feels. Even today, man, I'm living a life now that I used to absolutely pray for. And if I'm not watching myself, if I'm not actively working this program, if I'm not focusing on what I have to be grateful, I can find myself sitting around complaining and feeling sorry for myself about living this life that I used to pray for. So I started working with that sponsor. And one of the things he brought up, it was never brought up to me before, in that first step, it says on page 30, it says, "We learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we were like other people or presently may be has to be smashed." And that's all in one nice, concise little paragraph, right? And what he pointed out to me, because I never really could kind of match up that, yeah, I'm powerless over alcohol, but how exactly is my life unmanageable, right? Not being able to see the forest for the trees. No matter all the stuff that I had done in my life that proved the unmanageability, how am I truly unmanageable? And it's that delusional thinking. It's that thinking that this time I'm going to beat the game. If I don't make that phone call when I'm drinking, I won't get that other stuff and it won't be as bad. If I don't pull out, an extra $100 from the ATM, or I freeze my debit card and a block of ice in the freezer, I won't go do this. It's this delusional thinking. It's this delusional thinking that tells me that I can live a normal life without drinking and drugging, and also not working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the program. You know, there's a story in the back of the book that I really, really love that really, I think, in a lot of ways, just completely encapsulates where my untreated alcoholism brings me, whether I'm drinking or not, where it brings me. And it's actually, interestingly enough, in the story that's titled "Women Suffer Too," and it's on page 204. And it says, "With creeping insidiousness, drink had become more important than anything else. It no longer gave me pleasure, it merely dulled the pain." And that's something that I can really relate to, because when I was out there drinking and drugging, it had stopped being fun long before I got sober. It was pathetic. And all I was trying to do is basically just inoculate myself to not be present in my own body, to not feel the things I wanted to feel, to not remember the things I didn't want to remember. And when I stopped drinking and drugging, none of that stuff really went away, because I hadn't actually worked the steps to work on it, to become a better person, to get a relationship with a higher power, to do that moral inventory, to work through those grosser handicaps of my character. And so I'm super grateful that, what used to be my biggest point of shame has now become, my biggest asset, is the absolute proof in my life that no matter how long it's been since I've had a drink or a drug, if I'm not actively working this program, if I'm not reaching my hand out for the next sick and suffering alcoholic, if I'm not being honest with people about where I'm at, and if I'm not building and enlarging on that spiritual experience, whatever you want to call it, I'm dead in the water. All of that delusional thinking can come right back. All of that insidious insanity will come right back. All that terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair, all of it will come right back. And after that, those first couple of years, my higher power was Alcoholics Anonymous. When I finally started opening myself up for the willingness to believe in that higher power and actually really going through the steps and not just paying them lip service. Alcoholics Anonymous became my higher power. Yes, I would see people go in and out, but the group was always there. That safe space was always there. That camaraderie was always there. That fellowship was always there. And over the years, it's grown and it's developed and it's become something so much more. And I really love the daily reflection today. It's funny, I was reading it this morning, and then in our Discord chat for SERCYPAA, somebody posted it, and it's really great. And I'll just read it real quick. The idea of faith. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. Alcoholics Anonymous, page 47. The idea of faith is a very large chunk to swallow when fear, doubt, and anger abound in and around me. Sometimes just the idea of doing something different, something I'm not accustomed to doing, can eventually become an act of faith if I do it regularly and do it without debating whether it's the right thing to do. When a bad day comes along and everything is going wrong, a meeting or a talk with another drunk often distracts me just enough to persuade me that everything is not quite as impossible, as overwhelming as I had thought. In the same way, going to a meeting or talking to a fellow alcoholic are acts of faith. I believe I'm arresting my disease. These are ways I slowly move toward faith in a higher power. And the reason I love that daily reflection so much today is because that's, like most alcoholics, I have this all or nothing attitude. I think I have to rock these steps 100% every single day. I think I need to have a friggin' degree in theology to be able to truly do the third step and all of the subsequent spiritual growth. And it's not the case at all. I just need to be where my feet are. I need to be present. I need to be honest, not only with myself, but with others. I need to reach my hand out and say, hey, I'm Joe, I'm an alcoholic. I need to not hide behind my ego. Because I'll tell you right now, when I'm having a bad day, my brain goes, dude, you're coming up on 20 years. You're not supposed to have bad days anymore. You need to keep that to yourself and not share that with anybody. And then before I know it, I'm ate up with all kinds of craziness in my head. It's an amazing thing to show the newcomer that this thing works. But my time, I'm not gonna talk down about anybody else's time, but I will say about my time. My time does not insulate me one bit. It all depends on what I'm doing today to maintain and grow not only my sobriety, but my relationship with a higher power and my relationship with others. This book has some very simple instructions that are contained within the 12 steps. And if I'm not doing those things, I'm not working this program. And I know for me, I can only share for myself, when I'm not working this program, life immediately becomes so much more difficult and so much more painful and so much more just not great. The moments that I'm able to feel grace, the moments that I'm able to feel all the things that I thought that I would never be able to feel, are the very moments when I'm engaged in what can I bring into a situation? How can I be of service? Who can I help? Who can I talk to? Who can I just be present for? I don't even have to help or solve anything. Sometimes I can just listen and it'll be a service. I'm so grateful today to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous that takes this thing seriously and stays plugged in. It's funny, real quick, I'll share this and I'll shut up. Kyle said that I was involved in YPAW when I was down in Georgia. I was on the host committee for GICYPAW when it was in Savannah back in 2016. And then from there, I rolled on to advisory for Georgia. And I served on advisory for 6 years. And when I rolled off, I was like, screw this. I'm done with YPAW. I'm never doing this crap again. Like, I'm over it. And, shortly after that, I decided to move up to Virginia to be closer to my brother. And I moved up here on a Wednesday night, and the Thursday night I went to a meeting, and it just so happened to be the downtown Young and Sober meeting here in Norfolk, Virginia. And the first announcement I hear is a guy in there talking about how they're hosting WhiskyPaw and they need help on their committee. And I was like, all right, man, like whatever, dude. Like that's what I get for having ideas about what I am or am not going to do, right? And so I went home that night and I called some friends down in Georgia and I was like, you wouldn't believe this. And you know, I went back to that meeting and I reached my hand out and I met that guy. His name is Ben, and I jumped on the committee for SERCYPAA. And then through that, I met the people that were throwing SERCYPAA. So when SERCYPAA was over, I jumped over to the SERCYPAA committee, and I love it, man. I don't have to be the most important or coolest or best looking person in the room anymore. And I also don't have to be the wallflower that's like hiding out in the shadows. I can be a part of, you know. I heard people say when I first got into this program, one of the things people used to always say is get in the middle of the boat. And one thing that I found is that this is an infinitely expanding boat. You know, if we let other people into the middle with us, that doesn't say that there's less space. It infinitely expands. I'm 100% certain today that I have a higher power of my understanding and my misunderstanding that is interceded in my life, and that does for me what I cannot do for myself. I'm 100% certain today that this program works, but it only works if I'm willing to work it and do the things. I'm also 100% certain today that I couldn't be here today and I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for you all. Thanks for letting me share.